plus or minus. Large amount of excitement. So, I heffalump myself on the weekend. So, if you remember Winnie the Pooh story, you know the Winnie the Pooh story, right? So he follows his tracks. He finds a heffalump in the woods, and he goes after this heffalump. And then there's another heffalump joins in. Right? And he keeps following, and then there's another heffalump, and it's him following. He's going around his own tracks, right? There's no heffalump. So this is out of Bolton, and I do snowshoe running because I'm insane and the only person who does it, and it's amusing for me. But anyway, this is the start. This is I thought I'd run down this section and come out, some other part. So I run down this. Obviously, this is 10% incline here. This is more like 20. So I turn around and come back up. So of course I think I'm going to be somewhere else, but I'm going to show you what. So that's the downhill part there. And then I turn around and I'm struggling a little bit mentally, and I think, okay, I'm going to go over there. And I get back to, so I follow this up, and I get back to here, and I'm noticing that there are snowshoe tracks. And so I'm like, oh, someone else has been here. And about here I realize that they're going down. So like, okay, that person went down. And about here I realize it's the same place. So, the other thing is, I did exactly the same thing a couple of years ago. So in the same spot. It's confusing. So I have a good sense of direction, but that's pretty humbling. There you go. You have to come snowshoe running. So, all right. Promise it will be fun. Actually, it's great. So let's see. So, okay, so I broke these two sets of notes apart. It's not a big deal, but the lecture slides are separated now. So this is the overview of complex networks, the big deal, and then there's a separate piece now, which is the core models of complex networks. And so we've talked about the, do I have everything? Yeah, I've talked about the start of this over here. The generalized random network stuff. So we threw this in. We got that at the end of the last lecture. So today, and I don't know how much this will take. It might take some of Thursday as well. I want to talk about these small world networks, right? So this is this piece and the scale-free networks. These are the things that started everything. I think it's fair to say, really did, for this whole modern study of networks, which I've tried to frame as it's a different thing. It's based on big data. It's based on understanding why things come into being, right? So we're science of becoming. It's not the special math book stuff. Only certain things come into existence. So there'll be small world networks, and so there's a whole history of stuff that I want to tell you about here. I've mentioned a few things, such as the Bacon-ish number stuff, right? So that was a bit of fun, but we'll talk about some other things. And then scale-free networks. So this is Watson, Strogatz, and then some work we did at Columbia, and scale-free networks, Farabazi, and Albert. And this will connect back to Simon. So it all connects, right? Okay. I want to say there's a shadowy cabal, but you all know that's true. Okay, so we've gone through these guys. I need to jump to small world networks. All right. Yeah, good. So I've said this. So the study of social networks proper has been around since the 30s. People figuring out who's connected to who in small studies, and that growing larger over time. But always it's self-reported. It's a bit difficult. It's quite. If you had to list all of your friends, it's actually a difficult thing to do. Rank them, that's also tricky. Facebook will do that for you, but it is kind of tricky. You can forget a whole bunch. Like, oh yeah, but then there's the. It's hard to do quickly. I mean, over time you would do it. So how do we define connections? Best friends and right, best friends forever. Those things. Right? I mentioned my daughter has 10 of them. How do you sort that out? How do you measure these things well? So you can start to think operationally. Well, maybe we can do that with. It's a terrible word, but Facebook and Twitter and so on, you can see how many times people connect with each other. At least, that's something, right? How many times they put messages back and forth towards each other. There's content. That's hard to get out to think about. It's there, but it's hard to measure. So we have this, there are issues both with self-report, as I said, and also remote sensing, right? So we have these two sides to things, generally speaking. In science, where you're on a small scale, really getting into the details of something, or you've moved up to some remote sensing, which the CIA loves. Okay. So dynamics of social networks. How do social networks move? How do they change? So we'll get to some of this. We'll get to contagion and spreading. There'll be a piece later on. How do we solve problems collectively? Clearly, we've done it for thousands and thousands of years. How do we set things up so this works best, right? So Yahoo just announced very nicely that everyone who's been telecommuting has to come into work all the time. That was just a big news piece for one of our companies that probably shouldn't still be around, but anyway, it is. And so everyone's upset about that. But the story they have is that being in person, at that company is better for innovation. It's what Google does. Being at home is actually better for productivity. I mean, the worst thing you can do is go into your office if you actually want to do real, like write a paper, for example. But if you want to have fun and talk to people and think about things, it's good. All right, so how does information spread? This is a huge, huge deal, right? And that's been really, things have changed amazingly. I mean, now we have things like BuzzFeed, right? And that's very, very well tuned to try to get things to spread. We'll talk about that later. Which rules? Whenever someone starts talking about the for the greater good, we're in trouble, right? So, but that's kind of where we are now. You hear a lot of this kind of discussion. The financial system's not working so well. I mean, you've always heard this sort of thing, but now this is in the context of this big data world, right? We're getting all this data about financial stuff, about how people behave. So surely we could figure out, how to make a better world or something. So, that could obviously go horribly wrong. All right, so I like this term socio-technical, which I feel like I know, but other people do use this. It's so it's people plus computers. It's not techno-social. It's people first, but it's again something's been going forever before computers, but it's paper. But there are things that we might look at as how people behave together and how do they solve problems just naturally and so on. How do we get to things where we actually enable solving of problems by very deliberately doing this? What I call play and crunch, hunch and crunch rhyme, so that might be the one that sticks. Hunch and crunch, right? We're good with hunches. Computers are good at crunching. So which problems should we solve, right? Should we try to solve? So play and crunch is coming along. So there's the folded stuff. I don't know if you know about that. I talked about it, I think, in the projects. It's a good example. Of course, I repeat myself all the time. Repeater. Play and crunch. So Google's a good example, actually. Google is a socio-technical phenomenon, right? Because the links that were made, especially early on, were made by people, actual humans, like linking to pictures of cats. And they were meaningful, the best pictures, right? So they linked to them. And of course, people try to mess with that. It was easy to mess with the early search engines. Google was much, much tougher because it's all about these cascading links. We've seen people get around it by building farms of servers, or farms of, not farms of servers, huge collections of websites that point to each other in sneaky ways to trick Google. But Google's a great, it's nice to sort of see it in this kind of, this viewpoint, I suppose, which is that it's really inherently computers plus people, and it couldn't do it just with computers. AI is not strong enough to figure out all of these and just to sort through all this information in a way that we would like. And of course, we can't behave like Google, right? It's some monstrous amount of machines going berserk. All right. I mean, I remember, you guys were too young, but I remember when Google came to being as a graduate student. So a guy came in from the next room and said, "You should try the search engine." Wow, because it really did work. Now it's a bit messy. All right, so this is a very small piece. So lots of things we'll think about, and this is, I want to talk about the Small World story. It's quite a famous thing. It's had many iterations of examination, and I'll go on about some of that history. So here's a simple problem, and it's a good search kind of problem in general about informational systems. But this is people to start with. So can people pass messages between distant individuals using only their local social connections, right? So of course you can find someone in I almost said phone book, oh my God. You can look someone up on the web and send them an email, and they'll ignore you because, so the answer to this is apparently yes, right? So, and I'll give some history, some modern work on that, and then we'll go through an experiment. We'll go through some sort of real life use of this to do good things. I'll must be a bad thing. Right, there's always a bit of a flip side. And then we'll get into some theoretical stories for why this works, right? So why could these massive global scale, when we talk about the global scale, social networks be searchable? And what exactly do we mean by that? And it does give you then ideas about how you might construct informational databases, or just sort of play with them a little bit, or build on what's around so that they're searchable as well. So you think from an organizational point of view, so you have a problem, right? So you're struggling with something, say Toyota's had some great examples. So there was a fire, this is maybe 96 or 7, that burnt down one of their factories that built brake parts, right? And just, it was gone. So something like 98, 99% of that brake part was not being produced anymore. There was a tiny bit of redundancy. These companies are very good at building redundancy, right? So Toyota, in fact, is actually the head of a hierarchy of organizations that all are interlinked and they share people and so on, but they are separate pieces working together collectively. All right, so this thing burns to the ground, and there's all this concern, immediate concern, quite rightly, that it would take 6 months to get this going again. It's very specialized machinery, right? It's all gone. And then it would put a dent in the Japanese economy, and in fact, in the end, there was a tiny receivable dent, but it took 5 days to get that back up again. And so what happened was, this was about over 100 other companies started to retool machines to build this thing, right? They sent out the instructions, and so including a sewing machine maker, right? And they just, this really mattered, right? So they had great incentive to do it. Incentive matters, of course. But that's a fantastic example of kind of a robustness that emerged in, it's just a squirrel, if you're concerned. I went down the wrong maze. Okay, he chose poorly. Okay, so, all right, I got that. Okay, good. Yeah, that's a great. I mean, other places might fall apart, right? But this is it's a profound example of a robustness of a social organization to solve a problem, to spread information well. Right? They didn't fall to pieces. So if you've got, so here's another version of that. So you say you have a problem, you're struggling with something, and maybe it's a scientific problem or something, but you're in an organization, you can't get this thing to work. So what do? So you ask people around you if they can help, and then if the thing works well, then you can have those people, if it really matters, right, then people can move that question out, right? So it might go up through the hierarchy and down to another part. So how do you structure an organization so that kind of searching can happen? And if everyone's searching to solve the problem, it's very different. It's a lot of information going through. How do you do that? How do you make these things robust and kind of functional at this large scale? All right, so let's talk about this one in particular. Of course, going off on tangents a little bit, but so that's what happens. Right, so the man who struck the world. So this is a biography of Stanley Milgram, fellow Thomas Plas. So Milgram is probably most famous for his obedience to authority experiments, which you may or may know about. You can actually see some reasonably well put together videos of documentaries of how this played out. I have to talk about it. So the setup here was you were given this kind of funny contraption in front of you, and you had to ask questions to a person who was in another room. And if they got it wrong, you would zap them.
What's going on there?
What's that?
That's what's going on there, right?
Right. Squirrel got it wrong. Okay, so you would zap them, and you were being told by a person in a white lab coat to do that. Right? The setup was you would actually start, I believe, with this other person who would then move into the other room. So you ask the question, you can hear them, they answer, and then you zap them if they're wrong. If they're right, you just let them go. And this person's telling you, please continue. So this is one of the reasons we have, but this is one of the reasons that we have to be very careful when we do human subject research. Okay. It's not entirely Milgram's fault because it's sort of people's fault what happened, right? So people would keep going up through this dial until they got to what was signed as fatal, right? And they would push that button, and eventually the screaming, which had begun early on, stopped in the other room. So it stops. And they keep going. And so some fraction of people would keep going. And there were a few people who was like, this is just wrong, I'm leaving. But it was the obedience to authority setup. And in fact, I don't think it was the actual experiment. It was just a testing of everything. They're like, we're not going to do So there's that one, and the Stanford prison experiment, which get a big story. And there's lots of arguments about whether things really worked in the way that we believe they did. But that's one of his experiments. There are a number of others. I'm going to get to the small world one. He did lots of quirky things, like he had students go out onto the T in Boston, graduate students, and they simply had to do, if this was published, they had to go up to, this was the requirement, go up to someone who looked fine and they're healthy young graduate students, as graduate students are, even though they eat a lot of pizza, and just say, could I please have your seat? That's it, right? And I'm paraphrasing, I guess, and just check to see how many times the person would give up their seat or not. And there'd be sort of this bit of amusement. I mean, it's just to see, just messing with people, right? And so what happened out of that is they came back and said, this is horrible, I hate doing this. And he's like, what is wrong with you? We're social psychologists, we're better than this. And so he apparently went out and tried it as well. And it's quite painful because you're explicitly lying to this. If you're a pregnant woman, or that's the sort of scenario that everyone is fine with, right? But this is some healthy graduate student who's asking for a seat for no apparent reason. All right, so I don't know if that was published, but the end result was just the stress it was on that came about on the person for lying. There was also one where I think they set up camp across the street, and they had people look up the classic, look up and see how many other people look up. And so they had different numbers of people looking up, and they would count how many people, just to see, just an imitation, copying, right? And it sounds silly, but those things are just enormous for how we end up behaving collectively, right? I mean, we are amazing imitators. I'll come back to that later on when we talk about contagion, but just language, right? Language, the way we speak. I know I have a funny accent, but the way we speak, we copy each other tremendously. It's how we're really good with that fidelity. And my kids have the accent of the kids around them, right? They're not going to copy me. The bulk of the people we talk to who look like similar to them, in terms of size and interests and so on, right? They glom onto them. Some more than others, of course, but we're incredibly good at copying. So that's what he was trying to get at with that quirky little experiment. He did a number of others. He did this one though a few times in different ways. It didn't always work out, and there's one that got trumpeted and did work. So let me tell you about it. So it's this idea that people would say it's a small world, right? So you meet someone, you're talking for a while, you're in some venue, and it turns out your brother knows their college roommate or something, right? There's some connection that you find out after a little bit of time, and someone says it's a small world. So later on I'll show you the work we did with Robi Muhammad, who's from Indonesia, and there they were saying it's a big world. So it's kind of confusing to talk about. So we say it's a small world, meaning that we're not so far apart. So what he did was to try and test this, was to set up about 300 people in Boston and Omaha, Nebraska, which is a bit of a, it's a funny little selection, but interesting people here. So it's about 100 in Boston, about 200 in Omaha, and they were recruited in different ways, through a newspaper and calling people and so on. And asked them to do this. I feel like I need to wait. So here's the setup. He gave them passports, these little passports, and this is a clever thing to do. He was at Harvard at the time, and they wouldn't let him put Harvard on the front, right? So he put his address. So it had a bit more of it sounded good. It was a nice looking little thing, right? And so the idea was you were given the name of this target person who was living in Sharon, I believe, outside of Massachusetts, outside of Boston, in Massachusetts. And so you're given their name and their job, and I think maybe even their address. You're told where they were, who this person was. And the idea was to send your passport piece, this little package, off to someone you knew on a first name basis. I mean, there's some criterion that I can't remember straight away, but you have to have some reciprocal knowledge. It's not just a random person. And you could describe how strongly you knew them and so on. So send it off to that person, who then gets this little instructional thing with it. But now you're outside, you're away from Melbourne, right? So now you've just received this thing in the mail, maybe they call you as well, and you get this packet, and you send it on, if you like, to someone else who fits that same story, right? So you're trying to hop through the social network, and so it's a distributed search process. And pretty successful. So 20% of people got through to the top. And the average chain length, if you count the chain as the number of links, is 6.5. So this is a 6 degrees of separation, which has some other origins and so on. There's a John Webb play about this, and there's an idea going back, I think, into the 1920s. A Hungarian writer who just kind of came up with this story, right? That if you think about linking people and, around the world, that it's not that big. You know, there's a way to get to the Queen of England from everyone, if they're in England, say, for sure, and probably in the US. The question is then, can you find that, right? So we'll come to that, and can you have any influence through that chain? So that's, of course, a much bigger deal. So it's called the small world phenomenon as well. And this becomes this great thing for networks. So what else about this? So here, there are a few results in there that we'll come to. One was that so there's this one target person. Many of the successful chains came through one person towards the end, or just really a couple all told. So there was this idea of what he called funneling, and the hubs really mattered. That's another story for social networks. We'll talk about that in a little more. The other thing is a little more time. So the other thing is that the rate of success from step to step was about 75%. So if you just got this in the mail, so it's from your friend, so you know it's from your friend, your chance of complying was 75%. So people drop out for whatever reason. It's before junk mail, probably, before junk mail had its absolute heyday. It's before email spam, which we'll contend with in a little bit. It's before email. So this is the late 90s. All right. So you have this regular attrition thing. So that's a how interested are you? If we paid if they paid everyone $1,000 to send a letter, then we'd go through, right? So there's a big motivation piece. In some way, that's up. So here's the length of successful change distribution. So there are only 2 hubs, which is pretty close. So these are people that started in Boston. This is a bit of everything. This is Boston and Nebraska together. So you see, so what's happening is so there's an average in here of 6, and so Harrison White, who's a very famous sociologist who actually did a PhD in physics, and then decided to do sociology. This is in the 50s, I believe, is when he did his PhD. So he was at Columbia at the same time as us. I should say the other way around. We were there when he was there. He said, well, and we'll come to this. He said, well, what happens if you factor in this attrition rate, the fact that these things are just randomly stopping, right? Because people aren't complying. So you can do that, and you can kind of lift this up. You can see how many real paths of length 9 there are, given that quite a bit. The chance that you get through, if you have a real path of length 9, the chance you get through is 0.75 times 0.75. So it's an exponential decay. So we didn't really think about this. We made an experiment on this as well, and I don't think we thought about that properly at the start. It's a pretty, you're really losing a lot of, I'll show you that, you're losing a lot of chains as you go through, just through chains. All right, so there's Travis and Milgram as the paper you can link to there. So that's this district. All right, so that's interesting. That's where our 6 comes from. There's really kind of more of a 9 here, if you had everyone being completely motivated. So that's important. And these are not the shortest paths. We'll get to that. So there are 2 pieces that characterize what we would call a small world network or a small world phenomenon. Short paths exist. You have to have short paths. Otherwise, because of this attrition, you'll never make it along. And people are good at finding it. So this is something we kind of got stuck on. The work I'll show you, which is it's profound work from Watson Strogatz. The initial piece in '98 was stuck on this piece a little bit. I shouldn't say stuck. I mean focused on this. And then we have work from Kleinberg coming along later on, saying, well, there's an algorithmic piece. So there's geometric and algorithmic, right? So this is a gigantic algorithmic piece. You have to be able to navigate. And the work here is navigating a small world. So are these networks navigable? Very important point. Okay, so we did this experiment. So I'll tell you some results from our experiment. A couple of iterations. This is what the front looked like eventually. It's a bit of a funny thing, but it's supposedly tracing someone from India to someone living in New York. Goofy looking thing. the experiment that we really actually published on, this paper, was horrible to look at. It was a disaster. It was made out of Perl scripts and just nasty things, and it kind of sometimes fell apart. There's a MySQL database at the back that was just choking on things. Anyway, but and we thought no one would be involved, so I want to tell you something about that because it's a nice contagion story. Well, we hoped we'd get some people, but we thought, all right, let's do Milgram's experiment again. We'll do it with email, right? So that's what we're doing. Email, agreement. So we'll do it with email. I have to say, this thing keeps popping up again and again. The small world story. I mean, people. There was a few years ago, there was a piece published about Facebook, right? So what's the average number of steps between people on Facebook? And the funny thing is, it's back at this. It's just the short path story, right? It wasn't about whether it was kind of functional, whether it was findable, whether there was any influence that you had across those path lengths. Strange. All right. All right. So kind of terrible website. It just said thank you at the end. Right? You got to send on one email because we were worried about spam. You just sent on one email. We thought about changing. We worked towards changing it towards the end, but then we were kind of done with it, I think. So you can only send to one friend, right? And we asked you all these questions. How well do you know this person? Kind of a strong, weak to strong. Where did you meet them originally? Various other things. And then, of course, just basic demographics about the individuals involved. All right, so we ended up with about, this is kind of still amazing in a way. I mean, we want to reply. We've done some other experiments that I'll tell you about later on, but it's hard. It's hard. You've got to have some fortune to get it to work. So we had 60 because we're not paying them, and we're not really even giving them fun, right? So that's the problem. We're not giving them fun. If we were smart, we would have given them Facebook. I mean, it's really true. I mean, we had this idea of social search that we would, make collective detectives or something. We were worried about stalkers, but we sort of had this idea that you could find all sorts of things if you built this structure. But it turns out people are really interested in social networks, right? And they'll play around with a stupid website just to find out something because they just want to play this game. So we started off with 5 targets, and I have more on the next slide. But we ended up having 18. So we solicited, once the site got going, we said, if you want to be a target person, then sign up, right? And so we took some interesting people that turned up. So we had a professor at an Ivy League university who will prove to be somewhat crucial because that person is findable, right? Or at least in your mind, right? You're not in charge of the whole search process at all. You're going to send it off to a friend who's then going to maybe or maybe not comply. So you don't have control. And then, of course, once it gets a few steps beyond that, who knows? Yep. All right, so we had an archival inspector in Estonia. We had an engineer in India. There was a policeman in Western Australia. There was a vet in the Norwegian army. A veterinarian, I should say. And we ended up with out of these 60,000 people, we had 24,000 chains, right? So a lot of these chains, as I sort of suggest, right, it's exponential decay. They die straight away, or they die. They do a little bit better at the start because it's your friend. Oh, that's right. We did all sorts of things to make it look like your email address was. So it was all done through our website, right? Because you can't trace email outside. So it's all done through our website. So you had to log in. We did some really silly things. You had to log in and get a little account and send the email to your friend. And so you put in their email address. So we did some little scripting to make it not look like it came from us, but it looked like it came from their friend, which is totally wrong. Right. I mean, it used to be you could just, I don't know, if you install this telnet into some port and mess around with mail, and you could make it look like your email is coming from, I don't know, Daffy Duck or anyone. I mean, you could make it at waffle.com. And of course, if you looked inside the header, it's pretty obvious. But so we got on top of that. So I'll show you some more people involved on the next slide. What else is in here? But the first ones were people we knew. Right? So we were very lucky in that people like this, and it turned out that we were contagious. So the luck was this: is that okay? So the first thing we did was how do we get people recruited? So we've got an evil little spider software piece, a thing called a spider, which goes and grabs emails and pulls them together. And I had some terrible little Windows machine running it. It was just sitting in my colleague Duncan Watts' office, which just put it there and run this horrible thing. And it purported to say collect emails from Los Angeles or Seattle or whatever. Right? You put in a city and I say, I want email addresses from people who live there. I mean, it's just rubbish. But we get 10,000 email addresses supposedly from New York City. And then we'd set it up and say, okay, we're emailing everyone in New York City. You know, and it sent off all these email addresses. It was really awfully written. Everyone got a special password. But, you know, a lot of them were dead emails and so on. But it started to get a little trickle. So we did something evil at the start. And we had a little bit of a trickle. And we were just sort of blasting the world. Some people came to the site. And one of these email paths, or these little chains, somehow reached Sarah Milstein, who was a, I'm not sure if she's still, she was a writer at the New York Times back then, and there's a section called the Circuit section, which was the whole .com thing, which is gone now. And I think we're on like page 12 of the Circuit section, which is this Tuesday thing or something. So what happened was, it's a nice piece, and you can read about it. I found it, it's still there. You know, this is before we did our theory paper and all sorts of things. So this article just got picked up. So people really like this story. So it's just kind of a wire thing. People just replicated this story in newspapers and outlets all around the world. So out of our control, obviously, completely, very, very lucky. So there was all this interest. So we got a huge surge of participation. We got ourselves, I think, 100,000 people came to the site. Again, we're very stupid for not inventing Facebook. Although that is an evil thing. Something better than Facebook. Okay. Let's see. Twitter. So, let's see. This is a full list, you could look at it later on, but these are people we knew. I'm not going to say any names. We had a journalist in New York. This was a tricky one. We had an unemployed former student in Indonesia. Obviously, this is Roby's friend. This person was hard to find. We had an independent writer in New York City, PhD student in Novosibirsk in Russia. And this is an old friend of mine who was a travel consultant in Melbourne. This is a professor in Ithaca, Cornell, which might ring some bells for you, but say anything. And then the rest of these people are people who wrote to us and we put them in. So we had a potter from New Zealand, we had a Lutheran pastor from the US. I mentioned some of these others. We had a student in Croatia, also hard to find. We had a journalist in Germany, a librarian in Paris. We had a retired character in the UK. So a bit of, yeah, it's a pretty good spread. The potter in New Zealand was good. Yeah. All right. So I've mentioned this. Melbourne's participation rate was the compliance rate was about 75%. Right. So it seems really high, but 70, right? It actually decays somewhat, right? So you get up to 10 steps, you've lost a bunch. We did very, very well for email. I mean, even at this time, if you have surveys and things, you were getting maybe 1% of people were replying to your horrible little survey. So they were a bit excited about this, and we got up to 37%. So that's good. And once you get away from the source, I don't know if I have a plot here, but you can see that it's pretty constant. Right? So once this chain is traveling around the world, the source is gone. Right? I mean, there's a little thing that says it's Columbia, you have to go to this website, but it's come from your friend, it hasn't come from us. So it's just friends passing things on to friends. So it's, you know, it doesn't matter if it's 5 steps or 8 steps at that point. They're independent, they're behaving independently, which checked out. So for instance, if we have a length 10, you know, just doing this very roughly, if we have a length 10 chain, a whole batch of them, the chance of getting one through is pretty low. Just a bit more than, you know, it's 5 in 100,000 we'll get through. So that's bad. So that meant that we only ended up with 384 out of all those 20,000 chains that made it through, which is pretty small. We were doing something that was just a bit too hard. And I don't, you know, it was after the fact where we started to think about what the compliance rates were and so on. And if we'd allowed people to send free and so on, we could have overwhelmed that very easily. But anyway, but we have ended up with very good data on the completed chains about why that, you know, we can think about why they were successful. And compare them, so we can compare them to all the failed ones. Right, so we'll do that. So here's a general story that matters a lot, and this will come back later on when we talk about red balloons. So, which may mean nothing to you. So, let's see. Motivation matters, right? So why do you want to participate in this thing? It's a terrible website. It's 2001. We just discovered the web. And people were simply excited to take part in anything like this. But then the targets mattered as well, right? So if you were given a target, so you could actually go through every target. So that was something we allowed people to do. If they wanted to send an email, if they wanted to start a chain off, they could do that. And we did make some terrible little tracking thing that showed you where your chain had gone, sort of worked. There were some pretty interesting ones. There were ones, for instance, like the UK to Uganda to Moscow to Novosibirsk, right? So some weird hoppings around the world because people move around. So let's see. So he said knowingly. So small changes in attrition rates, right? So if we move that 37 up, that 0.37 up or down, then we get big changes in this exponential decay, big changes in our completion rates. So if we lost 15% of that attrition rate, I'm talking about it kind of the wrong way, then we'd have a much higher completion rate over that. This is for order 10, not order length 10 chains. Should make that more clear. All right, big changes. So people just having a slightly different version of whether they think that chain exists. Right. So the Ivy League professor, most people in the U.S., and of course many of these chains start in the U.S., could see a path. Not everyone, but many people can see that how they can work. You can get it to a professor, someone maybe, just get it to someone who went to college if you did it. Right. So you have some way that it could connect. Because this unemployed fellow in Indonesia, that's a much harder, like, where do you get it to help it pop? Right? And so people have to do some kind of crazy things, like maybe get it somewhere in Asia, right? That would be a start. So if you know someone, then maybe you can get it there. But you don't have a lot of faith in that it's going to work. Because that's, so a lot of, if you like, anyway you like golf, which you don't have to at all. It's a bit like that, right? So the first shot is a big kind of coarse kind of shot, like you basically get it into the area at the end of your putting. Sometimes if you go traveling, right, you get everything sorted out, you get on a plane, you do all those things, and you get to the street where you're supposed to end up and you've forgotten your address, right? So you've spent 8 hours getting somewhere, and then you're down to you're on the right street, and you've messed up, and you can't get that last little bit. It's like being on a green with a piece of wood instead of a putt, right? So anyway, I've done that a few times, and I always, you get the big pieces right, and the little pieces can be hard. All right. So I mentioned that we have all this data, of course, on the unsuccessful ones and the successful ones, so we can compare them, and we got a lot of interesting things coming out. Broadly speaking, let me tell you this: it's the choices people made that made these searches succeed, and it's not who they were. Right? It's much more weakly dependent on the demographics of the people involved. It's the reasons and the choice. Like you connected this person because they live in the place, which probably makes sense. Right. But this was a nice one. So this is the strength of the ties. Hopefully you see. All right. So the black one here is the strength of the ties for the unsuccessful chains, and the white squares here are for the successful chains. So you can see this movement out. So this is extremely close, very close, fairly close, close, and not close. So this is your definition of your relationship with the person you're sending it to. Right? So these are weaker type, what we call weaker ties going out here. I have a link to it, but this is Granovetter's 1973 work. It's famous work in sociology about finding jobs, actually, and that you do a better job if you're looking, so to speak, if you're looking for weaker ties. Right, so if you stay within your really close-knit, your family, you send it to your mom, you send it to your sister, that's not helping, because you're always going against this attrition rate, this chance that it will fail. So people who were part of successful searches tend to move the ball along. So that's a strategy. All right, so we've mentioned these. I've got a list of things. So there's weak ties. These are for the successful ones. People went for professional ties versus personal ones more often. And these ties that they're using started at work or college. Right? They're different too. Just being family and friends and so on. People went for target to work. 65% of the successful chains were going for this rather than the unsuccessful ones. They did avoid, and there's some other things in the other direction. So they avoided hubs. So only 1% of people said, so what I mean by hub is just someone has a lot of friends. And we could have given them more options, but we said, here are the options of why you're sending it to this person. Is it because they live near the target? Is it because they have a job similar to the target and so on? Is it because they have a lot of friends when we added at the end? And so people tend to do that in the unsuccessful ones. So this makes sense, right? They're kind of, I don't know, like I'll just smash it through the trees, right? It's kind of over there. Or I'm going to send it to get on the fairway at least. And this one is, really don't want to use the golf one, but anyway, it's just sort of, cricket, if I could do cricket. Anyway, so 1% for the successful ones. They're much more directed. They know what they're doing. Okay, so the family friendship ties were avoided as well. And very simple stories. People hone in on the geography first and then work. Right, so that was the big strategy. All right. I'll get through this. So let's see. So I mentioned this. So the senders, the people who are involved in the successful messages, if you just look at their demographics as a whole compared to the ones that are unsuccessful ones, not so different, right? It didn't depend too much on any of these things. But we can do something a little silly, I suppose. I'll have that. Age didn't matter too much, income, all these things. And depending on subpopulations, whether they're inside a successful or unsuccessful chain, it's like 30 to 40. So it's, if you break people, you say you break people down by income, because we ask people what their incomes are. We ask them a lot of things. It's kind of rude. I think it was optional though. If you break people down by income, then it's true that people who are wealthier did better, right? People who are less wealthy did relatively worse. But the range wasn't huge. It wasn't 100% to 0% for some subsets of the population. They did tend to go in the directions you'd think, and so here's a ridiculous kind of thing. This is not really, this is a contrived. These are the ones that kind of did the best in every category. So the Norwegians did the best out of all the countries. Secular, 30 to 39. I mean, you can kind of see this picture, but these ones did better. Earning lots of money, they're well educated, they work in mass media and so on. And it was males did a bit better than females. So then you have this Italians didn't do well, I don't know why. But so this is just ridiculous. It's earning no money at all, they went to elementary school and that's it, they're retired. So this is a bit simple. But these are sort of the limits. The thing is really the choices that matter.
Was there a relationship between similar SES status or any other status between the target and the initiator?
That's a good question.
SES is what comes to mind first of all, because when you tell these small stories, small world stories in the U.S. It's because everyone that went to a small liberal arts college, and so of course
you can connect those ones too. Yeah, I think that's. Did we do it statistically? That might be in there somewhere. It's fair enough. I think what I have is really the demographics didn't matter in general too much, but there might be a bias for that for sure. So I think. I think going back to say the fact that people, let's just say many of them started in the US, right, the chains, and so they couldn't get to the following Indonesia. Yeah. So I think, I think you're right. I'm sure it's a somewhat strong piece, but I don't know. So I feel a little bad about showing that previous slide because it's just sort of a made-up joke. One, it's not that the variation is not so strong with demographics. There is something. I mean, it does matter a little bit, but it's really the choices. All right, so we've had this. This is another piece here. Lots of friends. That's the hub thing. Likely to continue the chain was not such a good. These are things they tend to tank a little bit after people make those choices, right? They're sort of, I'm not sure what to do. So it matters. These pieces, right? So it matters that you know what you're doing, and the successful links are really using information in front of them about the person. Okay, that's good. All right, so there's a couple of extra results in here that we have to get out. Of course, everyone wants to know what the average is. We have the average was about 4 for the successful ones. If you do this thing I was talking about before, estimating the median, you can't really estimate the true mean, but you can do something where you estimate the median by saying, all right, well, we had so many successful chains of length 7, but if we factor in this failure rate that really seems to come from so many more. All right, so if we see 5 out of 100,000, 5 length 10 ones, then we say, well, that's really 100,000. Right, so it's a very rough course thing to do, but you can get the median, so where 50% gets it. So within country, which a bit of a funny thing to do again, but it's a difficult thing. You get 5 across countries. You get 7. Put everything together, you get 7. And Milgram, as I said, Harrison White did this work. I should link to that. You get 9 if you do the same thing. So even though we say 6 degrees of separation, that is somehow involving all of the motivation story as well, right? So that's 75% is sitting inside that 6 degrees of separation story. When we point to Milgram and say, yes, it supports this thing. We can't really say it's 4 degrees of separation because there's this weird motivation part in our experiment. But we did the right thing of trying to kind of put them on the same footing. All right, so let's connect this. So this is going forward a few years. So that's 2000, and that was published in 2003. There have been a few experiments, not that small world, but there have been a few other experiments that, for these large social phenomena types of experiments, they're hard to make. They have to do well, they have to be interesting for people, and they have to be socially important, or scientifically important. So that's hard, right? It's hard to make something that's fun, that takes off, and have it still be interesting socially. So scientifically, we'll get to that. So, all right, distributed social, because this is what it is, distributed social search. You're not in charge of all of these things. I have to say there were a couple of other pieces that came along. So we got emails from people saying, can you help me find X? Right? And one was, I met this guy at a rugby match in such and such. I don't know who he was. He was wearing this. Could you read this very, we started to think, I think we brought up this idea that we could help people. But there was one sad one, which was a letter from a fellow in England who said that he sent us a newspaper clipping from the 1950s saying his brother, it was about his brother who disappeared in Italy in the 1950s, and said, can you help us? We didn't know what to do. So we got a number of those sorts of entreaties as well. And then, I don't know, maybe Facebook helps you do these things. I don't know. All right, so it's distributed search. That's what I'm trying to say. Distributed search. So it's not, you're not in control of the whole search, right? It's somehow you participate, and then other people participate. If there's some big game that you're playing, you want to have some of that success come back to you. Right? So somehow you need to be rewarded for participating in that success. What we just had was that people thought it was fun, and that was it. Great. All right, so can you do evil things with this distributed social search story? You should always think about that beforehand, before you start talking about the greater good. So we're going to have some more about this later. So social-inspired algorithms for information search. Right. So there's a lot of bio-inspired computation. Neural networks, tons of stuff that's bio-inspired. But this is a very interesting case where we have social inspired, right? So how people behave collectively, giving us ideas of how to write up code. Of course, we don't want to understand people by themselves, but it also has this other impact. So we have this insanity problem, right? Who wants to do this, right? So what are you searching for? Does anyone want to help this woman find this guy at the rugby thing? You know what I mean? And if everyone starts to look for some misfit, weird. All right. Okay. So how would you get this thing to work? So you need some sort of influence mechanisms, and this already sounds Orwellian. You need something to make the game kind of enjoyable, right? So we really just had sort of fun and interest. Obviously, money is something that you'd like to throw out, but the more you can make it fun, I don't know, or that we're helping the world, prestige, and it has to be non-gameable. That's pretty tough. Right? So as soon as you put money into this, maybe you're searching for something using this distributed search, and then you know exactly where the thing is, and you've made a bad mistake where you say you give $1,000 to everyone in the link in the chain, then you just make up, someone makes an algorithm that replicates themselves 20 times, and sends the chain through themselves, and does bad things. I mean, they'll just do it, right? Usually you find out if it's gameable later on. So here's a grand challenge. So this connects back to the Milgram. Well, this is when the Milgram experiment was being done, so sort of connected. It's not really. It's in fact when I was born. So coincidence. The internet. Yes. So the ARPANET, 4 nodes, little baby internet went pop, and started to kind of dribble and drool, talk to itself, and so DARPA was involved with this, right? So I'm sure you all know about DARPA. There's also IARPA. IARPA is interesting. That's about intelligence and information. So that's a sort of DARPA version that does things around information. All right. So this was introduced by DARPA. It was set up by DARPA as a grant. This is a really interesting story. So this is set up as a grand net, what they call a grand network challenge. I mean, there are many of these grand challenges where we frame them for ourselves and go, okay, let's solve this big problem, call it a grand challenge, and we agree it's a grand challenge. And obviously, one of the grandest challenges ever run is putting man on the moon and that sort of stuff. So but we can have them at all scales. So this is a grand network challenge, and it's to celebrate the 40th birthday. So they put up 10, this is ridiculous, they put up 10 large, does anyone know about this? Do you all know about this? You do, all right, you think about your guns. Okay, so, but I have more to tell you. So Darwin puts up there, calculate wattage. Okay. These 10 balloons around the US, around the 48 states, just somewhere. This is what you were told. And I think people, it's probably, this poll was put out at least 6 months in advance. So there's going to be one day where these red balloons go up, and I think they're maybe, at most 15 feet high. And they're not right up in the sky. They're tethered to the ground. And they have a little thing on the side that tells you exactly where it is, like GPS, one line. And that's it. It doesn't say this is part of a DARPA thing. You should. I believe it doesn't have anything else. It's just a red balloon. So they put up 10 of these things around the 48 states, and the game was find them. Just find them. And there's a website set up, and you had to put up the lat long of each balloon in 10 entries. Just submit, and if you were right, then bing, 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 right? So you could try this as much as you wanted. Obviously, randomly doing it is bad. Right? And if you had 9 correct and 1 wrong, I think you got nothing back. This is pretty tough, right? So the question was, would anyone ever be able to solve this? They also put them up for just one day. So it went up, they appeared in the morning, and they were taken down that night. So that's it. And you had, for however long to solve it. So the question was, would anyone actually solve it? Which I think is fair. It might sort of fizzle, and we would not be so impressed with ourselves. There you go, it's 8 foot. They're 8 foot diameter, but it's not that big. This plus 2 feet. And somewhere. That's it. $40,000 was the winning prize, which is not huge. I mean, you could definitely put a lot more money into this. So it turns out, what do I get? Okay, so here they are. They are around, that's interestingly placed. There's a little bit of we're not worried about Canada, obviously. Some sense of sort of a military aspect. Some of them were in really obvious places where many people saw them, so Union Square in San Francisco. But then there were some other places, I think Katy Park, I don't think this was this was not where there are 10,000 people or something like that. But there's Santa Barbara, Scottsdale, Memphis, so they're put up. So you have to be someone or a team that somehow finds all of these balloons. Right? You can't. I mean, how do you do this? Right? So it's clearly it's something to do with the web. And that was the game. There's some social media aspect. All right. So here's the winning team. So it's the Media Lab at MIT. So they won in less than 9 hours. So this connects to our small world stuff, and our small world experiment. I'll explain how that works. But I want to talk about this. So I was actually down giving a talk at another lab at MIT on Friday, I think, and the story comes out that they won. I'll tell you what they were worried about. It hadn't quite gone out to the public. What they were really worried about, and I'll explain why, is that what they did looked like a Ponzi scheme. Right? It's only $40,000. It's not, you know, whatever, it's trillions of dollars that the US financial system runs on. But that looked a little bad. So one of these people, I think it was Riley Crane, is one of the sort of the key character in that. So he you know, got a team together, right? Here's the problem: he got the team together on the Thursday when they found out about the problem. And it was on the Saturday. I guess I was there on the Monday. So he heard about it and said, "Hey, does anyone know about social search?" And then someone sent back our paper, this paper that and said, "You know, there's this stuff in here about motives, motivation, and incentives, but here's the distributed social search book. Here's an experiment that you could build off of." And so he actually highlights that email. I've seen him give talks. He highlights that email. It's kind of funny. So the big point was we left that hanging. We said, I don't know, right? Motivation. Got to do it, but it's not clear how you do it. So they come up with a very clever way of doing it, so we'll get to that. So yeah, that's the galling thing. There were teams that have been building this up for months and months and months, 6 months, you know, whole crews creating websites and so on. And they just thrashed together a website and a whole scheme in a couple of days. And it does help that they're at MIT, right? So that they got to say, we're doing this thing, broadcast it, and people got involved. But yeah, a little rough. There were other teams that did pretty well. So there were other teams that got, I think, 9 of the 10 bullets. So it wasn't just this one team that was doing building runs. But of course, their strategy is the winner, and we tend to focus on it. So this is published in Science. It's possible I reviewed this paper. Time critical social mobilization. So that's what it becomes, right? It becomes this idea of how do you get people to do something really important. Maybe this wasn't important, but in some bigger sense, but it speaks towards that. So natural disasters and all sorts of things, response teams. We have decent systems for that anyway. It's kind of amazing how you can see there'll be a natural disaster in Florida, hurricanes, and if bad enough, you really will get people coming from all over the US. Obviously more from locally, but it's pretty amazing. So what they did was they recruited people online to help out, and they said they wanted 2 things. They wanted them to find the balloons, obviously, and they wanted them to get more people involved. So that was the key thing. Obviously, they had to find the balloons, but they wanted to get more people on the team. So how do you do that? This is tricky, right? You need to find more people who can find the people who found the balloons, right? And you might need to find people who find people who find people who find people. That's really what you want. You want all of this recursive structure going on. So this is what they did. So it's a recursive incentive structure, which some computer science people will love. And it's got a decaying payout. This is very clever. So there's $40,000, 10 balloons, $4,000 for each. This is what they did. They said $4,000 for each balloon. So none of the money was going to come to the principal. If you were the person, so you go to the website, you log on, and it was like balloon.mit.edu, you're registered. If you're the one who reports the lat long, and in the successful submission, it's you. It points back to you as the one who reported that. Then you get $2,000. If you were the person who recruited that person, you get $1,000. Right? You found the person who found the balloon. If you found the person who found the person who found the balloon, you get $500. And I want to say names, but I might. So you can see, right? You guys can really look at these things. So this is 250, 100. You add that up, and you get 4,000. If you go all the way down, right? So that was very clever. It stops it from. So you could game this. You go and find a balloon, you know all about it, then you create your own little dubious. Okay, so you see it straight away, right? See the minor flaw. But that would take a little bit of work, and you still wouldn't. Yes, you'd get a little recuperation. You still wouldn't. It doesn't mean you get. It's not like a chain letter or something where Amway.
Couldn't you also spitefully? I mean, if you were spiteful and you were the one reporting the balloon, I assume that's kind of verification where you agreed that someone else had reported you. So.
Oh, I see. So yeah, it's all done online. So when you log in, so if you get an email. So all right. So say you just sit at home, you never leave your house, right? And you're part of this. They want those people too, right? So all good people. So they want those people too, and they send to all of their friends, whatever it is, World of Warcraft, like Twitter. They just go, well, and here's a link. Follow this link and become part of this. They follow that link and it connects them. Right, so you log in and maybe you don't realize that, but you're connected to that person. Yeah. What do I think? Oh, so that connects to another piece that I sort of thought you were asking, which is what if people mess with them? So some of the other teams apparently did that. They started to mess with them. They started to send in false they saw they were doing well. It's undergoing. This is not. They win at 9 hours into the day, but from when the game started at maybe 8 a.m. But during the day, all this stuff starts to go berserk because people are giving them these ridiculous platform things. So what they did was they did a very simple thing, because that is a problem. They need to verify, is the person good or bad? You easily do this. Just one team can do this. They just log in 1 million times and send in rubbish, right? They did a simple check. Did the lat line match where the IP was? Right, so you can see where someone logged in from, and we have decent geolocations. Yeah, is it reasonably close? Yeah, and then that cleaned it all up. So that was a simple little switch, basically. And that solved the problem. So there was some naughtiness involved, and as I said before, other schemes did well, other methods did well, and it's important to kind of look at. It's important to look at those approaches as well, because for a different circumstance, maybe you would want to use this, maybe you want to use another one. If it's not money, maybe it's something else. But it was very nicely done. All right, so I've said these things. So you have incentives to do this, right? You have incentives to involve other people. Of course, you have an incentive to find balloons. And we talked about being gameable, but there's a cap on that. It's still not great. So the brand helped get it going. Right? As I said, they heard about it just a few days before. That's pretty bad. A number of other teams did well, and you can see that. And as I said, it's good to look at the competing strategies. So Crane was on, pretty sure it was on Colbert within the next week, because this was this great story. And Colbert's, one of his questions was, how is this not a Ponzi scheme? Which he didn't give up on. I think he just presumed that was just what it was, and whatever this guy from MIT was telling him, he didn't believe it, but I should link that in. Anyway, so there's this whole story now. We could do greater good, social search, all these things. Obviously, evil is involved. So I'm going to start a little bit of the theory section, which I guess I'll finish on Thursday. So we've had the old experiment, play, of course, the email experiment, the letter experiment, the email experiment, and then this recent use of this whole social distributed search to solve a very difficult problem. Right? It's just a really crazy problem. You couldn't do that. You just absolutely could not do that even 10 years ago. I mean, it's just really the internet helped. People being connected and good with spreading things. All right. So how do we understand this thing? So we kind of believe it works. I will say that Milgram ran a few other experiments that didn't work. That's kind of about the great tradition of science, making stuff up. Okay. I want to say the big bad for this course is stupidity. So we're gonna have to fight that later on. There's always going to be a big bad. Any good show. Okay, so all right. How do we understand this? Well, for a start, let's think about random networks. As I said, the pure random networks don't really exist in the real world, but it's good to always contemplate them as a base. They have lots of interesting properties that we can solve properly. So if you just create a random network, say we'll center ourselves at A, and we know there's really not much of this clustering at all, right? So that they're locally branching networks. So if we're just going to orient ourselves at this point A, and so somewhere out here there's B. Well, the average shortest path between A and B, if we move A and B all over the place, grows, generally speaking, as some logarithm of the number of nodes. It's very slow. So that's a good thing. So that's an observation that suggests, all right, random networks are not a bad, have some aspects of the small worldness. They have the geometric aspect. But of course, the very simple observation, very simple experiment that networks, social networks aren't like this. The big thing they're missing is clustering, just for a start. Other problems, of course, but that's the big thing they're missing. And searchability, they're random, right? So searchability, even absent the, I'm not even worried about geometry, the algorithmic part is really not going to work here as well. But to start with, we're going to focus on geometry. All right, so we've talked about clustering, so we need this. And so this is, so here we have our central node and the dashed lines showing that your friends know each other. It's just a very simple touch of socialness in kind of network. And there are lots of networks that have this, not just real human social networks. Lots of networks have this, what we call clustering. Neural networks, all sorts of things. But you need to have a little bit of this. So that changes. So as soon as you do that, though, as soon as you add clustering, you take away a lot of randomness. Right? It's really adding structure, local structure, and it also possibly makes the average distance between individuals larger, right? Because then you actually get clumpiness in the network, and it's harder to, or not even navigate. The average distance between nodes might expand. So here's a made-up example. The original model that Watson-Strogatz uses is a ring. This is just sort of an elaboration of that. I'll show you that picture in a little bit. But imagine here's A and B, and this should be 10 by 10, and so we have 10 hops. So it's an important question: do they even know that they're in 2 dimensions? And we're going to say in a social network, no, right? This is obviously very artificial, but they wouldn't even know this that this is moving closer because we can see it. Right? This is just your friend. This is another friend. You have these 3 friends. That's it. That's all you know about your social network. You don't know where they are physically in space. Doesn't make any sense here. So there are lots of long paths in here, but there's decent clustering, right? So that you have this character here, his friends know each other. Oh, that's not true for me. Okay, so it's true for this one. I guess I should add all those other pieces. So there's some amount of clustering, right? When we measure the average clustering in here, we have triangles being closed, and triples being closed, and into triangles, and so there's some amount of clustering. So there's some, it's obviously very ordered. But the general story is that the paths are too long. So we add, you can see this, we add just a few random links for this business, then the actual distance in terms of shortest paths for A to B, and of course we've added one that really helps the situation. But there's a link that goes from here to here to here. So you know this character, you know this character, you know this character. So that's, and then when you average over all the shortest paths, it decreases tremendously. So it's very simple. So we have order plus some randomness. And of course, saying it's simple is very much after the fact. This was hard to see. So it's Watson-Strogatz 98. Collective dynamics of small world networks, and so I can tell you a little bit about this. I'm trying to remember who was the person who told them this is this Milgram thing, because they didn't have that to start with. Okay, so in this paper you have this. You have neural networks of C. elegans. This is another piece of work later on. The networks of languages. The active collaboration graph is in here. Food webs, of course. Social networks of comic book characters. I mean, just went berserk, right? People started to find these small world networks in everything they looked at. Pretty much every interesting network had these small world characters. And it's because it has these very big requirements. There's some local structure and some randomness on top. Now, this is all purely geometric. One thing that should be, let me go back and show this. functionally you start to get all sorts of other pieces, right? So if you have a disease spreading from here, so it starts to spread out locally, but you're also spreading here, or it's ideas, whatever it is, then it can spread here. As soon as it hits this hub, or this one of the ends of these long distance ones pops over here. So that's so spreading is really greatly augmented on these small little networks. Synchronization actually turns out to be a big deal too, and so that's actually the origin of this work. So Duncan Watts was now, I guess, mercifully at Microsoft. So he went to Yahoo to be one of the founders of this research group there, and Yahoo. They're just trying to be something. I suppose I got rid of the research group recently, and so they're part of Microsoft now. But they do fantastic things. So, Strogat's big thing is sync, right? So Strogat's, they're actually going out to. This is true. So Watts is out climbing up trees at night getting crickets. Obviously, we'll be elaborating a little bit, but they're really getting crickets. And then they would get them inside and they'd chirp, they have an electronic chirp, and they'd see if they can get this guy to synchronize. Chirping away. Try to mess with the cricket and see if the cricket would chirp. Right? Just go out and play with sync, right? And then they had this question, well, what if we have a bunch of crickets together? Well, this is what happened inside, but they start synchronizing. So what if they're in little tubes, right? So you have your cricket in here. And then you have another guy over here, right? And then they have little headphones on, right? So they can only hear this one, and this one can only hear this guy, right? And so you start thinking, well, what happens? So if we have some really sparse network of crickets, will it synchronize? What if you take these links out? So to start with, if you go to these crickets sitting out, and we saw this with the fireflies, right? So if you have all these crickets, and they can hear each other, they can get into a nice big synchronization. Cicadas do the same thing, they get into a nice synchronization. But if you like, that network is fully connected, right? Everyone's connected to everyone else. So what if you start pulling those links out? Think of it like, that's one way to do it. You take away all the links, or you start with none of them connected, and you start to add a few links. And you mess with them, like you put a time, but you do all sorts of things, right? When do you get synchronization? So that was actually the original stuff, and so you have Duncan climbing up trees, and then going off to the computer to make up little models of crickets connected to each other. And it elaborated in lots of different ways. There's lots of exploration of mad things, but eventually it became, okay, so let's put our crickets on a little ring like this. And then we'll make some of the crickets know each other, so we'll give some socialness to this network. So you have some local wiring. So you can measure the clustering that you have, right? And then you think, okay, so this is very ordered and it has certain properties. And then what if we start to rewire this guy? And eventually, if you rewire everything, you get something that's close to a random piece, a random network. But it's in between those two extremes that you get what's called something that's a small world network, which has these dual properties. And I want to finish with that. Okay, didn't really need to. But okay, so there's a regular one, so it's very structured. You see it visibly from outside. This one is a mess. This is a pit. This is taken from here. This is some amount of rewiring, and the way they did it, it's stylized, is to pick up one end of the thing with probability p. So it's p equals 0. You don't rewire anything. You tune P up to 1, and when P is 1, you pick up the end of each link and randomly throw it down somewhere else. Which means you can get some funny things. Some of these guys can be disconnected, various problems. You can deal with that. But a little bit of rewiring goes a long way, which is the picture I was trying to show you before on the 2D line. So it's a little bit of rewiring, lots of local structures still, but a few random links. You get this this dual feature, and this is a great place to start. This dual feature, let's think about that. All right, so things are being normalized. So we have two pieces we're measuring. This is the average shortest path length. This is the average, this is the clustering. And then the way they did it, I talked about these different types of clustering. They had the average local clustering, if you like. They normalized by what they are when P equals 0, so that they fill in the same graph. Here's P on a logarithmic scale. So this is fully messed up. Going further down here, this is less and less messed up. And what happens is this drops. So the average path length, as you start to rewire, you get this feature of random networks, which is that they have a short average path length. That comes along in this particular model, around about p equals 0.01, you're really down, it's not changing too much after that. But as you rewire it, clustering holds on. The average clustering holds on for a long, long time. You have to really mess with things before this average clustering starts to decay. And the story in the end was, well, okay, here's this funny little family of networks. We've got this broad region, broad in logarithmic values of p, where we have this small world feature. Short path lengths, high levels of local clustering. So it looks social, but also looks like a small world. So the upshot is, this is just geometric. And this spawned an enormous amount of work. We saw it has 18,000 citations. Fantastic. It's a very important thing to do, to see this. There's the next stage we'll get to on Thursday that comes after this, which is thinking about, well, are these networks actually searchable? So it turns out they're not. So we need to think a little more about the real world networks we have around us to either manufacture them or understand them as to why they're searchable and have this real small world network. All right. Okay.